In the second part of the series, we will be looking at what the science says about global warming. We need to look into the question of temperature recordings by the various governmental meteorological organizations. The general public accepts the results in good faith, having no means of verifying them, which is why when evidence of falsification appears, people are understandably worried. There are two main areas of concern. One, temperatures have been going up because of the heat island effect. Two, temperatures have been manipulated or homogenized, giving a false picture. The first relates to the positioning of weather stations. Some which were in rural settings 100 years ago, because of urban sprawl, now find themselves in a parking lot. Many are located in airports, obviously affected by concrete and tar aprons, not to mention blasts from jet engines. The second relates to the smoothing of raw temperature data. Stephen Goddard, who blogs under the pseudonym of Tony Hiller, is a geologist by training. He has questioned NASA's temperature records, showing, for example, what NASA once showed and what they now show. Notice how the record temperatures in the 1930s have been downgraded to show a steady rise to the 1990s. Is this evidence of manipulation of temperature data? In New Zealand, a science education trust took the National Institute for Water and Atmosphere, NIWA, to court over alleged manipulation of temperature data. In 2012, the court ruled that the complainants did not have the standing to question the science, and the court was not the proper place to test the validity of the data. Costs were awarded to NIWA, so a victory of sorts to the alarmists, but not an altogether convincing result. So far we have seen nothing to warrant the alarmism and even hysteria portrayed by the media. By the way, this headline is misleading, as that is not an official estimate. Indeed, where I live, the NIWA figures show that 2018 was one of the milder years this century. So it is time to see what the science says. It is a case of the good, the bad, and the ugly. We begin with the bad. The heat waves and dust storms in the United States in the 1930s were certainly reported in apocalyptic terms, but of course CO2 could not have been blamed. Then the world went into a 30-year cooling phase, and Arctic sea ice reached a maximum. All of this occurred while CO2 was rising. The press, including the New York Times and Time magazine, warned of an impending ice age. 42 climate scientists wrote to President Nixon in 1972, drawing his attention to this threat. One proposal was to cover the Arctic with soot to absorb sunlight and melt the ice cap. In 1988, the picture changed as the world went into a warming phase, heralded by NASA's James Hansen, who claimed that CO2 was warming the planet. The media took this up and have continued ever since to present this as settled science. After James Hansen came Michael E. Mann's famous hockey stick graph of 1999. Michael Mann is a climatologist from Pennsylvania State University. He reconstructed 1,000 years of past global temperatures from a study of tree rings, a science called dendrochronology. Obviously there were no thermometers hundreds of years ago, so estimates of temperature had to be found by other means. A tree ring is thick in a warm period of high growth and thin in a cool period of low growth, so tree rings become a proxy for temperature. In the chart we see Mann's estimate of temperature in blue and thermometer data since 1850 in red. The light blue indicates Mann's estimates of reliability, so the temperatures could have deviated quite widely. Understandably, the chart created great alarm. However, the graph shows a steady decline in temperatures, culminating in a sharp rise since 1850. But appending real temperature data to questionable tree ring data is not scientific. Also, there is no sign of the medieval warm period or the Little Ice Age. If Mann's message was not alarmist enough, it became even more so when climate model results were published by the IPCC in 2001. At the heart of the models is the idea that increased heating due to CO2 will cause more clouds, which in turn will trap more heat. This is called positive feedback. In other words, we will have runaway global warming. Worse than that is the possibility that we will reach a point where the effect will be irreversible. Dire predictions indeed. Understandably, climate scientists became the rock stars of the scientific community, attracting huge government grants. One negative consequence of this was that almost no scientists within academia were brave enough to question the consensus. Indeed, they could be victimized and hounded out of their positions. One such person is Dr. Judith Curry, who identified the tribal nature of scientists in this field. Retired scientists, including some Nobel laureates, are under no such constraints, and much of the critical analysis of the science comes from them. We shall be looking into their arguments in some detail. A frequent argument for anthropogenic global warming is that 97% of climate scientists agree. More accurate is that 97% of climate scientists are either government employed or rely on government funding. Al Gore, the American presidential candidate of 2000, took up the issue. He produced the widely acclaimed film An Inconvenient Truth in 2006. It made some stark predictions and won him and the IPCC a Nobel Peace Prize. Some of these predictions were: 1. Kilimanjaro snows would disappear in 10 years. 2. The Arctic ice cap would disappear completely. 3. Polar bears would be decimated. 4. Melting of Greenland and Antarctic ice would cause several feet of sea level rise. 5. Florida would be engulfed. 6. Hurricanes like Katrina would become more common. Kilimanjaro has had its best snow in years. The Arctic ice cap is still there, and Antarctica is at record levels of ice. Polar bears are abundant, mainly because Norway has banned their hunting. We have already seen that the remaining claims have proved false. Now we come to the ugly. There was an extraordinary event in 2009 which came to be known as Climategate. Thousands of emails dating from 1999 between Michael Mann and his associates in the US and Britain were leaked. It lifted the lid on the workings of the leading climate alarmists. To say that they were conspiratorial is only to use their own language. In short, the alarmists were shown in very bad light, and much of their work was thrown into doubt. If you are willing to be horrified by the way these scientists were operating, read this account, which is available on the internet. It should be mentioned that the perpetrators were given a wrist slap by a subsequent investigation, but were otherwise exonerated. A key email was the following from Phil Jones to Ray Bradley, Mike Mann, Malcolm Hughes, Keith Briffer and Tim Osborne regarding a diagram for a World Meteorological Organization statement. I've just completed Mike's nature trick of adding in the real temperatures to each series in the last 20 years. That is from 1981 onwards, and from 1961 for Keith's, to hide the decline. The important phrase here is hide the decline. What does it mean? We now know that the data looked like this from Berkeley professor Richard A. Muller. The steep rise is missing. Instead, there's a steep drop. Undeterred, it seems that they seamlessly inserted real thermometer temperatures in the latter years. This is a trick indeed. Spot the difference. Understandably, scientists, including Canadian Tim Ball, became critical of Michael Mann. Writer Mark Steyn referred to Mann's fraudulent hockey stick curve. Michael Mann responded by suing both. The state of play is that Tim Ball won his case. Steyn has countersued and demanded the release of Mann's research, which Mann has refused on grounds of confidentiality. You may want to view Mark Steyn's observations on this matter in this YouTube video. We turn to the U.S. Senate Committee hearing of December 2015 and the testimony of Dr. John Christy of the University of Alabama. He pointed out that climate model predictions were all over the place, but the average prediction is shown by the red line. Contrast this with actual satellite and balloon recordings shown in green and blue. You may be interested to watch the complete video, which also includes Dr. Michael Mann, Dr. Judith Curry, and Dr. Roger Pielke. Note that Dr. Mann presents few facts beyond the claim that 97% of scientists agree with him. That concludes the second part of the series. In the third part, we will continue to look at what the science says.